Hey everyone, I recently made a video, which you can watch by clicking the card right here, in which I pointed out that reading Deuteronomy 34 and concluding that Moses wrote it would be a rather weird interpretation. Now I got a few replies to this video which advocated an idea that has been around for some time, that is, that Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34. Now this idea isn't just that Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34 full stop, it is that Moses wrote the rest of Deuteronomy, but that Joshua finished it after Moses died. I want to address this idea in a couple of ways. First is by pointing out several unfounded or unsubstantiated assumptions upon which this idea is based. And then I want to point out some points that actually are evidence against the idea that Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34. So first, the unsubstantiated assumptions. Unsubstantiated assumption number 1, Moses wrote the rest of Deuteronomy. If you read through the entirety of Deuteronomy, which I encourage you to do, you'll find that nowhere does it claim that Moses wrote it, nor is there any evidence that Moses did write it. In fact, it refers to Moses in third person all throughout, except for when it's quoting things that Moses said. But again, that's something that's normal in any story. Characters are quoted, and in the quotes of those characters speaking, of course, the characters speak in first person. But that is in no way evidence that the writing was authored by any of those characters. Unsubstantiated assumption number 2. The author of Deuteronomy 34 was someone other than the author of the rest of Deuteronomy. This is implied by the idea that Moses wrote the whole of Deuteronomy other than Deuteronomy 34, and then Joshua finished it up after Moses had died. But when you read Deuteronomy, the whole thing, including Deuteronomy 34, you find that it is written in a consistent style that indicates a single author. There's really no substantiation to the idea that the author of chapter 34 was anyone other than the author of the rest of Deuteronomy. Unsubstantiated assumption number 3, Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34. Yes, this is really the basic idea, but it in itself is an unsubstantiated assumption. There is nothing in Deuteronomy 34 which claims that Joshua wrote it, or in any other part of Deuteronomy. There's nowhere at all that even indicates the idea that Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34. So it's really just an idea that people come up with in order to save Deuteronomy 34 from being an evidence against the Mosaic authorship of Deuteronomy as a whole. In other words, since Deuteronomy 34 clearly could not have been written by Moses, and people want Moses to have written the rest of Deuteronomy at least, some will grant that, oh well, maybe Moses didn't write Deuteronomy 34, and a good second best option is, well, maybe it was just written by Joshua, because that at least has it written near to the time of Moses, and by someone who knew him, and someone who was the next appointed leader of Israel. Now, as I mentioned, it is not just the case that the idea that Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34 is based on unsubstantiated assumptions. It is also the case that we have evidence against this hypothesis. Evidence number 1, Deuteronomy 34 itself refers to Joshua in third person. This indicates that the author of Deuteronomy 34 viewed Joshua as someone other than him or herself. The only verse in Deuteronomy 34 which mentions Joshua is verse 9, and I'll read it right now and you'll see it's written in third person as though Joshua is someone other than the author. This is from the New Revised Standard Version. Joshua, son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, because Moses had laid his hands on him. And the Israelites obeyed him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. As you can see, third person, not written by Joshua. Evidence number 2, Joshua is exalted in this verse that we just read. I won't read it again, but as you can see, the verse says that Joshua was full of the spirit of wisdom and so on and so forth. Now, this is the sort of exaltation that people don't usually apply to themselves. usually it's someone else referring to the person as being so full of wisdom. Imagine if this was written by Joshua. It would mean that he is covertly being very self-exalting. He's saying, oh, look at Joshua, he's so full of wisdom, and so on and so forth. That would be rather odd for him to be doing that. It's not impossible that someone could do that, but I doubt that any of those who want to support the idea that Joshua wrote Deuteronomy 34 would want to make him appear as self-exalting when that is the inevitable result if he did write it. Evidence number 3. There are several places within Deuteronomy 34 which indicate that it was written a long time after the death of Moses. And I'll read the 3 places. It's just little clauses. One is from verse 6, one is from verse 10, and another is from verse 11. And all of these clauses I will read again from the New Revised Standard Version. So, in verse 6, "But no one knows his burial place to this day." So this is referring to the time when Moses was buried, and it says, "But no one knows his burial place to this day." Well, that's the sort of thing that you say a long time after an event. You don't say "to this day" if it just happened. And then in verse 10, we read, "Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses." Again, this doesn't sound like the sort of thing that someone would say right after Moses died. Let's just say after a president dies, you don't say on the day of his funeral or within a year or whatever, "Never since has there arisen a president like whoever it is." That's just not the way that people talk. What this indicates is that there had arisen prophets in Israel after Moses to whom Moses could be compared. And the comparison left Moses as being the greatest of them all. So the author could say, "Never since has there arisen a prophet in Israel like Moses." Lastly, in verse 11 we read, "He was unequaled for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to perform." This, just like the previous example, shows that others had arisen since the time of Moses who could potentially perform wonders, but when Moses was compared with them, they fell beneath him. He was still greater. So these are things within Deuteronomy 34 which indicate that it was written a considerable amount of time after the death of Moses. The last point that I want to make is really to encourage you all to examine yourselves regarding why you believe what you believe. What process do you go through to actually come to accept something as true? Is it based upon sound evidence? Did you critically think about it? Or is it just that you liked an idea and accepted it simply because of that? I, for one, think that the world would be a far better place if everyone took the perspective that they were not going to believe something unless there was sufficient evidence to show that it's true. If you in any way benefited from this video, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you think these are ideas and approaches worth spreading, then please like the video and share and subscribe to the channel. And also, if you want to receive notifications for all of our new uploads, don't forget to hit the bell.